Open your fridge right now and look inside. You see rows of food you did not hunt, did not gather, and did not grow. But 10,000 years ago, your ancestors made a decision that changed everything. They stopped wandering and started farming, and it nearly destroyed them. This is the story of the biggest trap in human history. For roughly 300,000 years, your ancestors were hunter-gatherers. They moved through wild landscapes, following animal herds and seasonal plants. Their diet was astonishingly diverse. They ate dozens of different fruits, nuts, roots, seeds, insects, and wild game. Each meal was different from the last. Their bodies were lean, strong, and remarkably healthy. Skeletal remains from the late Paleolithic show tall, muscular humans with dense bones. Their teeth were almost perfectly straight, with very few cavities. They rarely suffered from the chronic diseases that plague you today. No diabetes, no heart disease, no obesity. How is it possible that people without hospitals were healthier than you? The answer lies in what happened next. Around 12,000 years ago, something shifted in the Fertile Crescent. This is the arc of land stretching from modern-day Iraq through Syria and into Turkey. Your ancestors in this region began to notice something about wild wheat and barley. The seeds fell predictably. The plants grew in the same place every season. Instead of walking 20 miles to find scattered food, they could stay in one spot. They began to plant. They began to harvest. They began to store. This was the Neolithic Revolution, the birth of agriculture. Textbooks call it the greatest leap forward in human history. But the skeletal evidence tells a very different story. Bioarchaeologist Clark Spencer Larson spent decades studying ancient bones. He compared the skeletons of hunter-gatherers with those of the first farmers. The results were shocking. The moment humans adopted farming, their health collapsed. Average height dropped by nearly 5 inches within just a few generations. Bone density decreased dramatically. Signs of chronic malnutrition appeared in every farming skeleton he examined. Teeth were riddled with cavities and abscesses. Iron deficiency left visible scars on their skulls, a condition called porotic hyperostosis. These are tiny holes in the bone caused by the body desperately trying to produce more red blood cells. Why would a revolutionary food system make people sicker? The answer is devastatingly simple. Farming narrowed the human diet to just a handful of crops. Instead of eating 50 different wild foods, your ancestors now ate mostly wheat, or mostly rice, or mostly corn. One crop, one nutrient profile, one point of failure. A hunter-gatherer got protein from wild game, vitamins from dozens of plants, and minerals from nuts and shellfish. A farmer got starch, mostly starch. Their bodies were flooded with carbohydrates, but starved of essential vitamins and minerals. Anthropologist Mark Nathan Cohen documented this pattern across dozens of archaeological sites worldwide. Everywhere farming appeared, the same health decline followed. It did not matter whether the crop was wheat in the Middle East, rice in China, or maize in Mexico. The pattern was identical. Farming made humans shorter, weaker, and sicker. But the trap was already set. Once your ancestors started farming, they could not go back. Farming allowed populations to grow rapidly. A single acre of wheat produces far more calories than a single acre of wild food. More calories meant more babies. More babies meant more mouths to feed. More mouths meant you needed even more farming. Within a few generations, the population had grown so large that hunting and gathering could no longer support it. Your ancestors were locked in. They had traded quality for quantity. They had traded health for numbers. Could you imagine being trapped by your own success? The problems did not stop with nutrition. Farming created something entirely new in human history: property. For the first time, people owned land, owned grain stores, and owned animals. This created inequality. In a hunter-gatherer band, food was shared. No one hoarded resources. Anthropologist James Sussman studied the sand people of the Kalahari Desert. He found that hunter-gatherers actively prevent any individual from accumulating too much. They use humor, ridicule, and social pressure to keep everyone equal. But farming changed the rules. The person who owned the most fertile land became the most powerful. The person who controlled the grain store controlled the village. Hierarchies formed. Chiefs emerged. Slavery followed. For the first time in 300,000 years, some humans owned other humans. All because of a few planted seeds. Disease was the next gift of agriculture. Hunter-gatherers lived in small, mobile bands of 20 to 50 people. They moved constantly, leaving their waste behind. Diseases had no chance to spread through such small, dispersed groups. But farmers lived in permanent settlements. They stayed in one place, surrounded by their own waste and their animals. Archaeologist Thea Mollison studied skeletons from the ancient farming village of Abu Huraira in Syria. She found evidence of tuberculosis, brucellosis, and severe joint disease. These diseases jumped from domesticated animals to humans. Cows gave us tuberculosis and smallpox. Pigs gave us influenza. Chickens gave us various strains of deadly flu. Living in close quarters with livestock created a disease incubator. Epidemics swept through early farming villages with devastating regularity. A single contaminated grain store could poison an entire community. How did your ancestors survive this biological nightmare? Many of them did not. Infant mortality in early farming communities was staggeringly high, but the birth rate was even higher. Farming mothers could wean babies earlier because they had soft grain porridge. Hunter-gatherer mothers breastfed for 4 to 5 years, naturally spacing their children. Farming mothers could have a new baby every 2 years. The population grew despite the disease and malnutrition. It was a brutal numbers game. More babies born, more babies dying, but always more babies. The survivors carried on, generation after generation. Their bodies adapted slowly, but the damage was already embedded in their bones. The physical toll of farming was also extreme. Thea Mollison found that women at Abu Huraira had severely deformed toe bones and arthritic knees. They spent hours every day kneeling and grinding grain on stone saddle querns. Their spines showed compression fractures from carrying heavy loads. Men had repetitive stress injuries in their arms from hoeing and plowing. A hunter-gatherer worked roughly 4 to 6 hours a day to meet all survival needs. Anthropologist Marshall Solins famously called them the original affluent society. They had more leisure time than you do right now. A farmer worked from dawn until dark, every single day, with no weekends. Farming did not free humanity from labor. It enslaved humanity to labor. Could you handle that workload without a single day off? But here is the counterintuitive twist. Despite all of this suffering, farming won. It won because it produced more people, not healthier people. Evolution does not care about your comfort or your health. It cares about how many copies of your genes survive into the next generation. Farming populations expanded and overwhelmed hunter-gatherer territories. They pushed the foragers into marginal lands, deserts, and frozen tundra. The few remaining hunter-gatherer societies today exist only in places farmers do not want. The Hadza of Tanzania, the San of the Kalahari, the Sentinelese of the Andaman Islands. These are the last echoes of a lifestyle that sustained humanity for 300,000 years. Farming replaced it in just a few thousand. And the consequences are still written in your body today. Your crooked teeth exist because your jaw shrank when your ancestors switched to soft, cooked grains. Your wisdom teeth are impacted because there is no longer enough room in your mouth. Your back pain exists because your spine evolved for walking and climbing, not for sitting and bending over rows of crops. Your susceptibility to diabetes exists because your metabolism was never designed for a constant flood of refined carbohydrates. Every chronic disease of civilization traces its roots back to that ancient agricultural bargain. You are living in the long shadow of a 10,000-year-old trap. Jared Diamond, the evolutionary biologist, called the adoption of agriculture the worst mistake in the history of the human race. He argued that farming brought famine, warfare, class division, and epidemic disease, all of which were rare or non-existent among hunter-gatherers. The forager ate well, worked little, and lived in relative equality. The farmer ate poorly, worked constantly, and lived under the thumb of a chief. Which life would you choose if you could go back? But you cannot go back. The trap is complete. 8 billion people now depend on industrial agriculture to survive. There is no forest large enough to feed this many humans by foraging. The only way forward is through better nutrition, through better medicine, through understanding what your body actually needs. Your ancestors made a choice 10,000 years ago. They chose security over freedom. They chose quantity over quality. They chose to plant a seed instead of following a herd. And that single decision echoes in every meal you eat today. Open your fridge again and look inside. You no longer see just rows of convenient modern food. You see the end result of the biggest gamble in human history. You see the agriculture trap, and you are still inside it.